Hello everybody and welcome to Getting Started with Axure. My name is Keith Weston. In this video I'll be going over the software Axure RP Pro version 6.5. I'll be going over many of the different sections of Axure to let you know how to get started with your wireframing and prototyping. Now I have listed here the different sections I'll be going over and their timestamps, so if you want to skip to a different section of the video, feel free. Axure is broken into 7 different sections. These sections are the Wireframe Pane, Sitemap, Widgets, Masters, Page Information, Widget Properties, and the Dynamic Panel Manager. The Axure environment is very customizable. You can minimize entire areas with these gray arrows. You can pop out individual sections with these diagonal arrows. You can resize these sections and even move them to different monitors if you want to clear up space on your primary monitor. You can exit them if you don't need them. And then to get them back, go to View and click the one that's missing. If you want to reset your environment, you can go to View and Reset View to get the default state. The Wireframe pane is the main section of Axure, and this is where all of your widgets and components will go to create your wireframe or prototype. The wireframe section has a few options to help you line up your items. It has grids and guides. So the grid is now enabled, and you can see it by the dots on the screen. You can customize the grid by right-clicking the wireframe pane, going to Grid and Guides, and you can hide the grid and change the grid settings. Guides are a little more useful than grids because there's more customization. In this example, we'll hide the grid to show you the different guides. To create a guide, you have a few options. You can click and drag from the ruler, and this will create a blue guide. A blue guide indicates it's only for that page and not for the other pages. To create a global guide, or a guide that will be available through all of your pages, hold Control and then click and drag. This line is pink, indicating that it is available on the rest of your pages. Another way to create guides is to right-click the wireframe pane, Grid and Guides, and Create Guides. Here you can specify the number of columns, column width, gutter width, and margin that you'd like your guides to be. You also have a few presets, such as the 960 12 column and the 960 16 column. I'll choose to create this as global guides. You now have a 960 system to work with, and they are pink, so they will be available throughout your entire prototype. You have a few more options to customize your guides. Right-click on your wireframe pane, Grid and Guides. You can choose to hide global guides or to hide page guides per page. You can select to lock your guides, and this is something I would strongly recommend. It is very easy to accidentally move your guides when working with widgets if you don't lock them. And then you can delete all of the guides. Make sure to unlock your guides before you choose this option, or they won't be deleted. There are a few ways to navigate through your wireframe pane. You have the traditional vertical and horizontal scroll bars. You can also hold the space bar, and that creates this hand. And then if you left click, you can now click and drag to any section of the wireframe pane you'd like to go to. Another quick shortcut is to press the home key and then the control home key, and that'll navigate you to the 00 portion of your wireframe. The sitemap section contains all of the pages of your wireframe or prototype. When you create a new Axure RP file, it defaults to have a home page and then page 1, page 2, and page 3 as child pages of that home page. You can choose to move these around by using drag and drop or using the arrows above. The sitemap is listed as a tree structure, so you can collapse and expand different parent branches. If you want to move a page over, you can use the left and right arrows listed above. Axure can also generate flow diagrams. In this example, we'll create a new page and rename it Flow Diagram. You can also give this a different symbol to differentiate a page and a flow diagram by right-clicking, Diagram Type, and Flow. It now has this symbol that indicates it's a flow diagram. We'll double-click to navigate to the page, click on Home Page, right-click, and Generate Flow Diagram. We'll make it a standard instead of a right hanging. You can now see my site structure that's reflected in my sitemap. These are clickable, so when you run the prototype, clicking on page 1 will navigate you to page 1. The widget section contains the majority of the components that'll be used in your wireframe or your prototype. Here's the wireframe library, which comes with Axure and has many default UI elements such as rectangle, text, buttons, drop lists, text fields, checkbox, radio buttons, menus, and a tree view. I'll use a rectangle to demonstrate some of the formatting options that are available in Axure. To add it to the page, I'll go to my rectangle in my widget library, click it and drag it, and release. I can now see so many widget properties available to me, available in the top menu or on the right square in the widget properties section. I can move my rectangle by pressing an arrow key, that'll move it by 1 pixel, and I can also hold shift and arrow key, which will move it by 10 pixels. You can also manually set the location of the widget by going to Location and Size and entering value. Many widgets in Axure have a text property. To edit this text property, double-click on the rectangle and then enter your text. A common mistake many new users make is they drag a text panel over a rectangle, when this isn't needed because the rectangle itself has a text property. The widgets in Axure have many formatting options. Here I'll change the text to the Axure handwriting style, make it a little bit larger and bold, and then I'll also change the background. You can change it to a solid color, such as this gray, or you can change it to a gradient. Here I'll alter the angle so that it's vertical instead of horizontal. And I'll also edit the gradient as well. You can edit the border thickness, and you can also edit the border shape. The rectangle also has many other different options. Here I'll add a new one to the page. In this example, I want to change the shape of the rectangle. So I will right-click the rectangle, edit button shape, and then select shape. I now have many other different options available. Here I'll choose a rounded rectangle. When I choose a rounded rectangle, a yellow arrow appears, and this indicates that I can change the radius of the rectangle. I'll also see what other options are available by right-clicking and edit button shape. I can edit text as well as double-clicking on the rectangle, and here I can edit the different styles that this rectangle might have. Here's the rollover style, or when the mouse hovers over the rectangle during the prototype. Here I'll change the rollover style. I want the rectangle to have a slightly different fill color whenever the mouse hovers it. So I will select a gray here, and I'll preview this. Now when you run the prototype and you hover your mouse over this rectangle, it'll become that gray color. There are other important widget properties that are listed below Edit Button Shape when you right-click. These are also accessible by going to the Object menu at the top. I'll add another rectangle to my wireframe. Now if I have both of these selected and I right-click, I can group these. This is very useful for when you want to group a logical set of widgets. If I click this, they're now all selected and will move as one. Next option we have is order, and I will ungroup these for this example. When you add a widget to a page, it is on top. So because I added this rectangle last, this widget will appear on top of the other rectangle. I can change this by using the order, and if I right-click, order, and send it back, this is now behind the other rectangle. The next option is align, and this is helpful for if you have many widgets and you want them to all be against one line. I personally use the snap feature, which is indicated by the blue lines and the grid, so I don't use align very often, but you do have that option available to you. I'll select all of these, right-click, and align to the left. And they're now aligned on this left side. Next one is distribute. This is helpful for when you have multiple widgets and you want them to have even spacing. So I will add another rectangle, and now you can see there's much more space between the second and third rectangle than there is in the first and the second rectangle. I will select all three, right-click, distribute, and distribute vertically, and now there's an even space on the top and the bottom. Each widget in Axure can have an annotation or a footnote. If I click on a widget, I can now add an annotation in the widget properties on the left block. I'll add a description. This is a rectangle. You can now see a yellow footnote appears, and this will appear as a sticky note in my prototype that I can click and read that description. Another widget property is locking. Locking is very important for when you don't want to work with a widget and you don't want to accidentally select it. So if I only want to work with these two, I would lock that top rectangle, and now when I select them, if that was unlocked, I would accidentally select the top one. But because it's locked, I now only select my two rectangles. This is very important if you use a background image. You don't want to select that background image to move. You want to move the widgets that are on top of it. You can also convert these to a master and a dynamic panel, and we'll talk about those shortly. Now that we've gone over several widget properties, let's look at the other widgets in the wireframe library. We have an image. You can drag this to the screen, double click, and that will prompt you to load an image from your computer. Text panel is basic text without any borders. We went over the rectangle. Here's your placeholder, which has the same properties as a rectangle, except has a cross in the middle to indicate that it is a placeholder. Button shape. Button shape is the most often used for button. You also have button down in the library, but it's a much more standard button and has less options, so I typically always use button shape. A dynamic panel is used whenever you want an interaction on the screen, and we'll go over those later in the video. You have horizontal and vertical lines that are pretty standard. An image map region. Text field for entering text in a form. And this does work in the prototype. So if you were to click your mouse cursor inside of this text box, you can start typing in and that text would be available. Text area in your drop list or combo box. And you can edit the combo box by double clicking and now entering many of the options in that box. 1, 2, 3. I can also set the default state of that combo box. Now when I run the prototype, I can click this arrow and select 1, 2, or 3. You also have list boxes. Let's clear some space up. Check boxes and radio buttons. Radio button needs a radio button group assigned in order to function like a traditional radio button. You do this by adding many radio buttons to the page, selecting all of them, right-clicking, edit radio button, and assign radio group. I'll name this radio group 1, and I'll also set a default. Now when I run my prototype, if I select the second option or the third option, this option will clear. You also have an inline frame. Inline frame you can use if you want to have external websites show up through your prototype or wireframe. A table, and then we have vertical and horizontal menus, and also a tree structure. All of the widgets we have looked at so far are on the default wireframe library, but there are many other libraries available online. One great resource for this is the Axure website. Download Axure and community widget libraries. There are many free libraries and paid-for libraries available on their site. Once you download the library, which has a RPLIB extension, place it in your My Axure RP Libraries folder, which should have been created when you installed Axure. After you have placed it in this folder, you'll need to refresh your widget library or restart Axure. The Masters section is directly below the Widget section and is great for when you want to use the same widget in multiple spots of your application. We'll do an example here with a master. I will create a new master, and I will rename this header. I will now double click to get into my header page. I'll add a rectangle, and this rectangle will be the header of my website. And I will put in the text header as a placeholder. Now I can add this master to many parts of my application, and whenever I change it in the master, it will be reflected in all the places that I put it. So I will put this header in page 1 and page 2, and you can see it says header on both. I'll go into my header master, and I'll edit this text to say new header, and now you can see that that new header has changed for both pages. Another great use of the master section is to create a custom widget. In this example, I want the same style button to be applied throughout my application. So I will create a new master and rename this button template. Now it still has the behavior of a traditional master, and I want it to be a custom widget. So I will right click, behavior, and then custom widget. It now has a gray icon instead of a pink icon to indicate it is a custom widget. So I will double click to edit this master. I will add my button shape, and it doesn't matter where you put it on the screen. On this particular button shape, I want it to have a very large radius, and I would also like it to be Axure handwriting, and I would like it to have a fill of a light gray. So now this is the same style button that can be used throughout my application. I'll go back to page 1, and I'll add my button template. You can now see that whenever I add this button, I'll have the same style, so I don't have to repeat that style whenever I add a new button. Editing one of these buttons does not affect the other buttons on the page. The page information is at the bottom of Axure environment and has page notes, page interactions, and page formatting. These are all for the page that you are currently working with, so any changes I make here will only affect page 1. I'll add a note here, page 1 note. This will appear to the left of my prototype when I generate it. Here's some page formatting options. If you want to, you can set the entire website or keep it left aligned. You can also add a background color and a background image, and then the vertical and horizontal alignment of the image, and if it repeats. Axure also offers sketch effects, so if I turn this up all the way, you can now see that this header and these buttons look like they were sketched. This is good for when you're showing stakeholders a prototype to let them know that it's still a work in progress. Now that we've worked with the Wireframe pane, added pages to our sitemap, worked with widgets and masters, and added page information, let's take a look at generating the prototype. To generate the prototype, go to Generate, and then Prototype in the menu. You can also hit F5. Axure generates HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files for the prototype. Here you can specify where you'd like those files to be prototyped to, and which browser you want to open with. On the left navigation, you have a few other options, such as which pages you want in the prototype, notes, annotations, and interactions. You can also upload your own personal logo instead of using the Axure logo. We'll now generate the prototype, and it'll open with Internet Explorer as specified. The prototype is split into two sections. The left section is the left nav, which has the sitemap and the page notes, and the right section, which is the main area, has the wireframe. The left section, you can see, it has the sitemap of the pages that we created. Home, page 1, page 2, page 3, and the flow diagram. Here on the flow diagram, you can see I can click on home, and it'll go back to my home page. We also have the page notes as the second tab in the left section. Here we can see that note I wrote earlier, page 1 note. Now that we've gone over how to generate the prototype, let's talk about dynamic panels and interactions. Dynamic panels and interactions are used whenever you want something on the screen to interact or to change. The Interactions tab is the middle button in the widget properties. One of the most commonly used interactions is the quick link, which links you to another page. I'll do an example where I put a global navigation in the header that links to our sitemap pages. I'll double click the header to navigate there, and then insert a button. This one will be for the home, and I'll label this home. Insert another button. This will be page 1 with a label of page 1. And then finally page 2 with a label of page 2. My desired goal is to have these linked to the pages in the sitemap. For the home button, I will click on the Interactions tab and then Quick Link, and now I'll click the home page. I'll do the same for the rest of my buttons with the respective pages. Now let's generate the prototype. I can now see that in my header I have clickable buttons. If I click on page 2, I can now see it navigates to page 2, and then page 1 navigates to page 1. A dynamic panel is used whenever you want an area of the screen to change from one state to another without having the screen to refresh. The dynamic panel can be found in the Wireframe library in the Widget section, and you can manipulate the dynamic panel with the Dynamic Panel Manager on the bottom right. Let's add a dynamic panel to the screen to see what it can do. In this example, I want to have a dynamic panel with two states. One is red and one is black, and I would like to be able to switch between them using buttons. First thing we'll do is add a dynamic panel from the widget library to the page. You can see it has a blue mask, similar to how a master has a pink mask. If you want to turn the mask off, you can go to Wireframe and then Mask Dynamic Panels. You can see as soon as I put it on the screen, the unlabeled dynamic panel with one state was created in my Dynamic Panel Manager. I'll double click this to edit it. I'll give it a name, call it Color DP. I like to put DP on my dynamic panels to indicate that it is a dynamic panel. I'll rename this first state to be red, and then I'll add another state of black. So now you can see in my Dynamic Panel Manager, I have one dynamic panel with two states of red and black. Now let's put our objects in the dynamic panel. I'll double click on the red state to open that state. You can see the dotted blue lines to indicate the size of the dynamic panel. I'll add a rectangle, and this is my red, so I will give this a fill of red, and I will take away the border. So now I have a red rectangle. I will copy and paste this, and it'll retain its location. And now I will change this from red to black. You can see when I navigate back to my page that you see the red. This is because the red is the first option under the dynamic panel and is the default that will be shown. Let's generate this prototype. So now you can see I have my red area, but there's no way to change it because I have not yet added the buttons to change it from red to black. Let's do that now. I'll add my first button to the page, double click, and then name this red with a label of red. I'll do the same with my black button. So I'll click my red button, and then I want an on-click event to occur. So I'll double click this to open my case editor. I know I want to alter our dynamic panel, so I'll look under this section. I want to change from one state to another, which is the first option. So I click that, and then I select which dynamic panel, which is my color DP, and it gives me some options. It fulfills the options that that panel has, such as red and black, or I can go to the next, previous, or specify a value. I want this to go to red since it's my red button. We can also give it an animation like a fade. I want to do the same thing with my black button. I will click my black button, double click on click, set panel state to state, choose my dynamic panel, and then set to black, and give it a fade as well. Now, when I click on the red button, it should turn the rectangle red, and then when I click on the black button, it should turn it black. Let's generate this to see if it works correctly. Now my red changes to black, and the black changes to red on the click event. Interactions can also have conditions. Right now, the red and black buttons do not have any conditions. They will occur no matter what. But you can also set them up to occur only if a condition is met. In this example, I'm going to add a checkbox that says lock, which means I won't be able to change if it's checked. So I will scroll down my widget library and have a checkbox. I will name this lock. So if this is checked, that means I will not be able to click the red or the black buttons. I will also name this lock. Now I'll click on my red button and open the case I had previously set up. I'll add a condition, and in my condition builder, I want the is checked of, and it automatically selects the only one available, lock, equals false, then this will occur. I want to set up the same condition for my black. So I will edit the case, add a condition, and do the same thing. If is checked of, lock, equals false, and OK. So let's run this and see what happens. You can see here that I can click on my red and my black buttons and it changes from red to black. I'll select my checkbox that says lock. I'm no longer able to change this back to red. If I uncheck this lock button, I can now change this back to red and then back to black. As you can see, there were many options that you could do with dynamic panels and with interactions, and we only went over a few of them in this video. I recommend experimenting with all the different options that are available to see what you can create. Sharing your work is essential to wireframing and prototyping, and Axure offers a few ways that you can do this. When you generate a prototype, it generates those HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. The simplest way is you can zip those up in a folder and send them to somebody. There's a few other options as well. You can host those folders on your own web server so someone can visit your site and view that prototype, or you can use a service offered by Axure called Axure by generate and publish to Axure. Axure is very nice because it uses a cloud service and it has some features such as password protection. Another way to share your work is to create a Word document. To create a Word document, go to Generate and Specification. The options here are very similar to when you generate a prototype. You can choose which pages, masters, page properties, include a screenshot, and you can also upload your own custom template. I'll generate the Word document. Here you can now see the specification that was automatically created with the items that we put in our prototype. You can also export all of your wireframe or prototype pages to images by going to File, Export All Pages to Image, and then selecting the image format that you desire. Here you can now see all of my pages have been converted to images. That wraps up the Getting Started with Axure video tutorial. I hope in this tutorial you learned enough to get your wireframes and prototypes going. If you want more information, I do recommend visiting the Axure website at www.axure.com. They have a wonderful online community. If you ever need help, you can visit their forums and post a question. If you ever need to download more widget libraries, as I described earlier in the video, or if you need to learn more advanced topics such as working with conditions and variables, they have training for that as well. Thanks for watching.